Welcome to our new quest log. This is Following the Scent. We're looking at a new approach for Charzi. This is a dog who I've worked with for a long time, and an approach that I've been trying out with some dogs and actually with my cat, and working on building uh, exploration and specifically dog-driven handling and searching while we work on building his confidence in new environments. So let's meet Charzi. Charzi is an adult. He's about 4 or 5 years old. He's a mini golden doodle. He's been a client of mine for a long time. We've worked on private sessions. We've worked with day training. We've worked with board and train. So a mix of different services. And Charzi really struggles with environmental sensitivity, human and dog reactivity, and resource guarding, all to various degrees with various amounts of predictability. So he's a really, really challenging case. And I think what makes Charzi even more significantly challenging is that his response to training, his response to cues is often a conflicted one in and of itself. He very quickly is limited in his ability to take food when he's out and about. And in addition to that, too much food or too many cues is more pressure than he's prepared to handle when he's out, especially when he's out and about. So his response to, when we talk about repeated cues, or we talk about bringing a dog in to take treats, and how we want to be mindful when we do that, because it could be understood by the dog as pressure, that cues, asking the dog to do something, is a form of pressure. That is typically, for most dogs, a fairly benign form of pressure, and just something we want to be mindful of when we're looking for true and honest reactions. Charzi is a little bit more extreme in that extent, because his reaction to training when he is already stressed is to experience additional pressure, and that often leads to him shutting down entirely or can exacerbate a reaction depending on how over threshold or how close to threshold he is. So that's an additional complication with Charzi that we've had to work around in a variety of ways for different situations throughout his work with me. So the experiment here is inspired by a handling technique for nose work called dog-driven search, which is a phenomenal nose work technique that I've been learning in the last several months. And then in combination with some of the decompression tracking that I've been working on with some of my behavioral dogs, and looking to apply these things and kind of combine them into a application to behavioral work that can increase motivation, increase independence and agency with the dog. We tend to work with our dogs, especially when they need help in certain areas and they are challenged or complex in certain areas. We tend to provide help very operantly. We ask for behaviors from them. And in a lot of ways, that's phenomenal. That's what they need. They need that understanding of an expected pattern. If it's one that they can offer, they need that understanding of a particular cue. And it helps so many dogs. My concern is always what happens when we aren't there to provide the cue, what happens when we aren't there to complete the pattern. What is the dog capable of doing on their own? And so a lot of my continued education is seeking out what these dogs can do on their own. So this is to increase their motivation for exploration, increase their feelings of independence and confidence, and really help them work things out independently with the consistent and present handler support, with really, really clear support, but not necessarily having the primary reinforcement derived from us, not necessarily having the focus of the session be on us as the handler. So what that means is that I'm going to be attempting, I learned that it's very difficult to do this and hold a camera. I'm going to be attempting to hold the leash, not necessarily taut or tight, but to hold the leash without much or any slack in it, unless Charzi is actively eating, because I want him to know that I am there, but I don't want him to feel restrained, and I don't want him to feel that he has to push through something to continue his walk. And that's one place where this is going to differ a little bit from its source material. But I want to keep the leash primarily and predominantly out of his way, which you'll see I get mixed up on a couple times throughout these clips, mostly because I was also holding a camera and I need to get a chest strap. But I'm holding the leash out of his way, and I am really truly following his lead. I am setting a perimeter in my mind of where we're going to be working, but within that perimeter, I am following Charzi, and I am angling myself toward him and trying my best not to make any handler suggestions of where we should go next. And sometimes that means leaving behind what I set up as his reinforcers. And that part gets really hard. So let's talk a little bit about the setup of this search. So this is first what Charzi looks like initially when he tends to come out of the car. He very, very rarely is able to take food for me right away in a new place. He might sniff a little bit, but he is very, very aware of his surroundings. He is very upright, leaned forward. He's not balanced in his own posture, and he's very hectic in where he's going. So as I'm watching him, I'm setting kind of a mental perimeter of this is the general area where I set up a search, and we'll talk about what that means. And this is where I want him to be looking. And that's the only place that I'm going to anchor and stop him from moving forward. Within there, he can walk. And then this is what I set up within that search area. I set up several circles where I walked in a circle around, you'll see little metal rings. I walked in a circle around these metal rings and dropped treats in that circle. Now, if you're actually familiar with the sport of tracking, if you're actually doing tracking, you will notice that my scattering of treats is incredibly haphazard. I am okay with that in this context. I don't mind it because I'm not really concerned with him associating this with my footsteps. I'm not really concerned with him being able to take food out of these tracks. I want him to continue eating. My focus is not having too much food in one place because that also can be felt as pressure. One of the things I noticed when I first took Charzi out and just started letting him move on his own was how much he struggled to appropriately engage with his environment and not be stuck in this hectic, hyper-aware state without verbal direction from me. And that's just because it's a skill set that he hasn't built. So that's where this activity comes in to help him understand what he can do without being asked for something by me. And you'll see how quickly he jumps onto this idea and how quickly he's able to start taking action without me. So we start the search. From the moment he caught scent, he's less hectic. He's still moving fairly quickly across the field, but he's much more focused on searching for something. When he stills, he sniffs. He's not sticking into that very, very leaned forward posture. His posture is much more balanced, and he fairly quickly finds a circle. And he was able to eat. I cannot express to you how incredible it was to have within the first couple minutes of our session to see Charzi start eating, especially eating off the ground, not something that was offered to him right in front of his face, that he was able to start eating off the ground. This was huge, so enormous. I loved it. You'll notice that he doesn't finish this circle, and that's okay. So the important piece of this is helping our dogs find enjoyment in exploring a new environment. That's something that we can help build with our environmentally sensitive dogs who are scared just of the novel environment itself. It's something we can build in our reactive dogs who have too much focus on people or dogs or bikes or cars or whatever their triggers might be in those new environments. This is something we can help them learn to focus on instead, and eventually get to a point where these circles in the area don't need to be set up ahead of time, that they go into a new environment with this expectation that they'll be able to explore confidently, that they'll find interesting things to sniff, interesting things to look at, interesting things to move through, and that will be the joy of the outing rather than immediately scanning the environment, immediately shutting down or becoming very subdued because the environment is so scary. So that's the goal, and the eventual goal is to work into environments that don't necessarily have these circles and the Reinforcement is just exploring the environment itself. But for the moment, we've got these circles, and being able to go into them, support him, meaning just standing still and orienting towards him as he searches through it, and orienting and moving with him as he leaves, is the name of the game in this first session, as he starts exploring these trail circles. And then we got a couple hard moments. So what you don't see in this video is right as this started, this is right at the end of an interaction we had with the person you see kind of leaving. She had a little Yorkie who was off leash, and he came about to where you see the dried grass, the yellower grass, stop. So he came fairly close to us as we were working through circles. And so some of this was about figuring out where to incorporate help as Charzi needed it. What I noticed about his body language while he was looking at that Yorkie, while I was speaking with the woman to call her dog, is that yes, he was attentive, but there wasn't that forward body posture. There wasn't that lean forward with his weight distributed unevenly, so he could very easily spring backwards or spring forward as he needed to. He was much more balanced even when he was paying attention to the other dog. There was no sign of a reaction. There was no growl. And he was able to orient to me on his own, which in and of itself is not super unusual for Charzi. He knows the game Look at That very, very, very well, and will very often make a really good choice about another dog. But this dog was approaching us and was seemingly not under great voice control. And so it was a huge deal that he was able to just move past something, just like he's able to continue on his path, approaching the main path, as this person is walking by, and he's not fazed by that either. So what I noticed almost immediately was that he was able to that his engagement was vastly improved just by a few minutes of working on these trail circles, working on this scent. So the other thing I noticed is that after a few repetitions that he asked for of Look at That, which is why I decided to reward him, I didn't cue him for anything. After he looked back and forth between us, kind of confirmed that my support was still there, you see him choose to go back to sniffing. Now, like I said, opting for the Look at That, offering the Look at That, not an unusual behavior from Charzi. He's very, very good at that. However, he is usually then needs a cue or something asked of him to move back into the activity that we were taking part in. And so what I find so impressive here is that he is able to just slip right back into the search rather than getting caught up in, in what the dog is doing, what the people are doing, and the other triggers that are still present in the environment. He can be a little bit uncertain about car noise. There's plenty of car noise. He can be uncertain about new environments. This is a park that I have not taken him to before. So all of this is new to him. And so you see this little offered Look at That. He offers it a few times. He gets rewarded. And then after that last look, he goes right back to sniffing. And I'm so, so proud of that. So hard moments were so much easier for him to work through as we worked through these circles. I made a few adjustments for the next attempt. So the next time I was out with him, we went somewhere else, and I changed a couple things around. I started several of my circles closer to the car and closer to each other. And I parked much, much closer to our search area, so we didn't have to walk through a whole bunch. Part of that was because that first time I wanted to have a baseline of where he was. And the second time, since I knew he relaxed with this method, I just went ahead and went right into searching. I did test again how he was doing with food. Now you see he walked almost seemingly directly to this scent circle and is eating. He would not take food before this started. We were in a new place once again. He was uncertain once again, but he fell into the searching pattern almost immediately. And again, this is the second time that we have done this together. So I was especially impressed by how quickly he slotted in to this practice being what we were doing, even when he was just shortly before this in a situation where he was not comfortable taking food. So this was a fantastic method for Charzi. I think for dogs like him that can be um, subdued or suppressed, especially by environmental triggers, as well as by humans, dogs, vehicles, reactivity. Not necessarily ideal for the dogs that want to rush in. They might need something else first, because if we follow their lead completely, then we have also possibly rushed them past threshold. But even that, I think, can be adjusted based on how we're setting the parameters of the search area. So I'm super excited about this new-ish approach, or this combination of approaches, and how well I've seen it work for Charzi, how well I've seen it work for a couple of other dogs, and how it really does re-emphasize how doing less from our handler perspective can do so much more for the dog. So I'm going to be continuing to work with this handling approach and getting creative with dogs who've struggled with behavioral challenges, behavioral complexities. I loved watching how Charzi was able to acclimate to his new space. He was very neutral to things that typically would be very triggering for him, and was able to understand very quickly, seemingly, that the engagement in his environment was the reward that he was looking for, rather than looking to me for rewards, or rather than needing to build up the value of the food in that environment before he could be reinforced. So what questions do you have? Let me know what you see in these videos and what you would change or improve, and how you want to see this approach developed a little bit more. If you want to see more of this, subscribe for more of these case studies, real world training tips, and other stuff. And I've got virtual coaching available. There's a link in the description for more from me, where you can find me on other social media platforms, where you can find me for training assistance. And I'll see you next time.